The ingredients for our fresh cut fries are really very simple. We want to have a nice quality russet potato. That makes a great French fry. So the same potato you would use for a great quality baking potato or baked potato. We also are going to need a large amount of oil for frying and some salt for seasoning. And then of course, anything that you like to dip your fries in to enjoy them. I don't need a lot of equipment for my fresh cut fries. I need a cutting board and a good quality chef's knife, a vegetable peeler if I want to peel my potatoes. I have a large bowl to soak them in salted water overnight, and a deep fryer to cook the fries after they've soaked. If you didn't have a deep fryer, you could use a large skillet to put your oil in to fry your fries, or excuse me, a large saucepan or sauce pot. But you should always make sure that you're monitoring it closely with a thermometer if you choose to use a pot on the stove. So because I want to peel my potatoes, I'm going to go ahead and wash them off and get them all peeled before I begin to cut them into French fry size. So I'm just going to use that vegetable peeler. Doesn't take a lot of pressure to get the potato peeled. And then as I peel them, notice this curved side goes against my potato. As I peel them, I'm going to place them in a bowl of cold salted water to keep them from turning brown, because I'm going to peel all of my potatoes and then I'm going to cut all of them into French fry shapes. If there's any bad spots, you can either use the peeler to work through those, or you can use a paring knife to cut them out. So I'm going to peel all of my potatoes and then I'm going to cut all of my potatoes. Notice how I'm peeling my potatoes over my cutting board, and that's really just so it kind of catches them and they'll be easier to move to the trash or compost bin when I'm finished. You never want to peel your vegetables over a garbage can, because sometimes they can get a little slippery and come right out of your hands, and then where does it land? It lands in the garbage. So you want to make sure that you cut it over a plate or a cutting board, or peel them over a plate or a cutting board, so that if you drop them, you can still salvage your vegetable. Now that I've peeled all of my potatoes, I'm going to set them on some paper towels to dry off just slightly to make them easier to handle when I'm cutting. And I want to change out this water, because as I cut these into French fry shapes, I'm going to add those to this bowl. Then I'm going to wrap it up and store them in the refrigerator overnight. So I've changed the water, rinsed the bowl out, and added new water with some new salt. I've got one potato at a time that I'm going to cut. I'm going to turn it on its side, and I'm going to make one cut right down the center with my chef's knife. And then I'm going to lay it flat, because a potato this is stationary, it's not going to move, it's going to be easier to cut. One like this, if I have it on this side, then it's a lot more difficult to work with. So I've cut it flat, and then I'm going to cut 1/4 inch thick slices on each half. And then I'll take those slices and lay them sideways. See, so I can get 2 potatoes. So it's about 1/4 inch this way as well. I have a nice, great big steak fry sized potato. You can work with these one at a time or in small stacks. It's really a matter of what you're comfortable with. and where your knife skills are at. So if you have to cut them a single layer at a time, it is going to take you a little more time. But if that makes you feel more secure in your task, that's time well spent. So we're going to cut all of our potatoes until I've got them in this bowl. Now I have all my fries cut, ready to soak for a minimum of 30 minutes, but I like overnight. It's going to draw some of the starch out of those potatoes, and that's going to help us to have a much crispier, delicious French fry. I do want to make sure that they're completely submerged, so I want my water line to be over my potatoes. I'm going to wrap this in plastic and put it in the refrigerator, like I said, for overnight. You could also put it in a container with a lid if you wanted to. So these will be all ready to go when we're ready to fry our potatoes. Now that our fresh cut fries have had time to soak in the salted water and draw out some of that starch, we're going to drain all of that water off. And then we'll also want to pat them dry to get them as dry as possible before we put them. So you can see all the starch that came out of the fries beyond what was in the water itself. We want to pat them dry before we put them in the fryer for the first fry. So now in setting up to cook my French fries, I have my deep fryer warming up to 275 degrees, and that's for the first fry. So all my fries are going to go through at 275, and that's going to help make sure that they get cooked all the way through and the inside is done, and it helps to make sure that we get that nice crispy French fry at the end. So we're going to put them in for about 5 minutes at 275 degrees, cycle all of those through. I have a separate baking pan ready to catch all of those and drain the excess oil. And we'll let those cool off for a little bit before we put them in for the second fry. We're not adding any salt at this point, not until after the second fry. Now my French fries, or my deep fryer is ready to fry my potatoes and create French fries. When I filled this, on the far wall, there are some words, minimum and maximum. And I want to make sure that my oil is never below the minimum line and not over the maximum line. So I'll have to keep an eye on that as I fry. But I know my deep fryer's hot because I can put in one fry and I should see it. I'll test it. And you can hear it start to cook. But the light has gone out on the temperature setting, and that tells me that it's ready to go. So I'm just going to do small batches. I don't want to overload the fryer. The potatoes won't cook correctly. And especially on this first one, I want to shake them around a little to make sure that they don't stick. So I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes, and then we'll move them to a baking pan, paper towel on baking sheet to drain. Now that our first fry is finished, we'll take these out of the basket. We'll take the basket out of the fryer and dump them onto that paper towel and add our next batch of potatoes. Be careful when you drop them so that you don't splatter the oil onto you. Need a few more in there than I had last time, but again, you don't want to overload it. And on this first one, it's especially important that you, a couple times through that 5 minutes, just shake them so that they don't stick together. Now that I'm taking my last batch of first fry out of my deep fryer, letting those drain and cool before I put them in for the second fry, I'm going to go ahead and place that lid back on to help my fryer heat up a little more quickly. And I'm going to turn the temperature up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit for that second fry. So it'll take a couple minutes for the fryer to heat up, and then we'll be ready to go. Now that the light has gone out on my deep fryer, I know that it's reached that 350-degree temperature. So I'm ready to second fry potatoes. So again, I'm going to carefully place them in the fryer. I want to make sure that I don't get any oil splattered on me, and I want to minimize the mess in the kitchen. And I want to make sure while I utilize the full, I put in a full fryer of fries so that I'm efficient with the energy usage and my time. I don't want to overcrowd it because the fries will not come out correctly. So now this time they need 5 to 6 minutes, and really color is going to tell us a lot about our French fries. We want a nice golden brown color on our fries. Then we'll dump them onto a paper towel lined tray again, but this time we'll add some salt. While our French fries fry this time, let's talk about some of the precautions to take when frying foods. So we want to make sure that we are always regulating the temperature of our oil so that it doesn't get too far and get to the smoke point or the flash point, which I'll talk about more in a minute. So a deep fryer I like because it regulates the temperature itself. It keeps it at that constant 350. It drops a little, it brings it back up, and it really doesn't take a lot of your time to keep an eye on it. If you choose to deep fry on your stovetop, you really should have a thermometer that can stay in the oil the entire time, and you'll have to keep a close eye on the temperature of the oil and turn the heat down or back up as needed to regulate that temperature on your own. What we're trying to avoid, we want the oil to be the proper temperature to cook the food, but we also want to make sure that we don't have a fire start in our kitchen, because a grease fire can be very difficult to handle. One thing to remember is that a grease fire should never be put out with water. It will cause the oil to spatter all over. It'll displace it. If it's caught fire, then you're displacing droplets of fiery oil, and your kitchen will quickly be engulfed in flames. So never try to put out a grease fire with water. You can put on a tight fitting lid. You can use a fire extinguisher, but never water. It's also important to remember that a fire needs 3 things to burn. So to put it out, you have to eliminate at least one of those. One of those is oxygen. A tight fitting lid or a fire extinguisher will smother the fire. It'll take away the oxygen. You can also take away heat. That's the second thing that a fire needs to burn. So cutting off the heat, unplugging the fryer, going down and flipping the circuit off, even if it's too far to get to the fryer itself, or it would be dangerous, you can do that as well. And then the last thing that it needs is fuel. So make sure that you're not adding anything. Don't try to put anything on the fire that it would instead begin to burn. So if you put out a fire with flour or baking powder, it's going to burn because there's flammable ingredients in there. So we want to make sure that our fire doesn't happen, and for a fire to occur, it needs oxygen, heat, and fuel. All right, so it's been a few minutes. You can see my fries are getting to a nice kind of golden color. Now I'm gonna dump these, just take the basket, dump them onto a paper towel lined tray. And while they are fresh from the fryer, I'm gonna add the salt. And I'm adding kosher salt. Just makes them a little more decadent. You might need a little bit of recovery time in between batches. Keep an eye on the light if you're using a deep fryer, or the thermometer if you're using a pan on the stove. 350 for that second fry gets us that nice golden brown color, a fry cooked all the way through and crispy. Now we have our fresh cut fries, salted, warm, crispy, ready to enjoy.